Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us once again here on Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, and in this segment, we're going to be speaking with Dennis Urbaniak. He's joining us here as Executive Vice President of Digital Therapeutics at Orexo. It's a pharmaceutical and digital therapeutics company addressing the unmet needs in the mental health and substance use space. He's joining us here to give us a little bit of insight into Deprexis. Deprexis is a fully automated digital therapy that's going to help manage symptoms of chronic or recurrent depression or depressive disorders for patients aged 18 and older. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Dennis. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Neil. It's a pleasure to be here speaking with you.
I spoke a little bit about your role at Orexo. Give us a little bit about yourself and tell us what you do briefly.
Neil, so I run our digital therapeutics business unit here at Orexo, and Orexo is a company that is dedicated to substance use disorder and mental health. So all we do, we have pharmaceuticals, and we started with digital therapy in 2019. And we started because we saw the need for ways to provide scalable counseling that still had clinical data supporting it and could deliver positive patient experience. So we've got 3 digital therapies now. Deprexis, as you mentioned, is one of the most studied digital therapies in the world for depression, as you talked about. And we also have Vorvida for problem drinking and Modia, which is used in opioid use disorder.
So exactly what are digital therapies or digital therapeutics, and what makes them important now?
It's such an important question, Neil. So, and Orexo is a proud member of the Digital Therapeutics Alliance. And I offer that because I think they have one of the clearest definitions of digital therapeutics. And in simple terms, digital therapies have 2 criteria that they meet that separate them from the broader digital health world. One is they're validated through randomized clinical trial evidence that's peer reviewed. So they have a high performance standard for both safety and efficacy. The second thing is they meet regulatory and legal standards with respect to security and privacy. Obviously, as these are data-driven therapies, you want to make sure that you have clinical effectiveness and safety demonstrated, as well as privacy and security. And so digital therapies meet those standards. They're also reviewed and either classified or approved by regulatory bodies. And so in the U.S., that's the CDRH division within the FDA.
I was under the impression that the digital health apps that are out there that are floating around all had to be under the same scrutiny. Was I wrong in that assumption?
I think a lot of people, there's so many, right? If you look at Google Play and the App Store, we're talking about over 500,000 applications that meet the term digital health. So there's a lot out there, and there's a lot of misunderstanding or different understanding. Not every single one of those requires the same level of scrutiny that I just spoke about for digital therapeutics.
Okay. So should healthcare professionals as a whole start to pay attention to this, I guess, a rise in popularity? There is a rise in popularity of digital therapeutics, right?
There's a significant rise in popularity, and I think the rise in overall digital health is a positive. As with any type of medical intervention or option for a healthcare professional, I think the kind of grounding elements are still, you want to focus on what's the best choice that you determine for that patient. And then you want to look at what's the experience, what's the evidence of supporting that use. And the rise is significant. I think with the pandemic in particular, we've seen a need to be able to reach people in different ways and provide therapies that can be there beyond the visit. And that's with our therapies, for example, they're all rooted in cognitive behavioral therapy techniques and are available 24/7. So they're highly complementary to the provider's visit. And I think providers do want to start asking about what's the evidence that's supporting this particular therapy that they may be considering. Has it been reviewed by FDA? Does it meet the criteria? That's why I pointed to Digital Therapeutics Alliance as a simple checklist they have that you can go through to give you confidence about how well tested and validated a particular therapy may have been.
What do you say to those healthcare professionals who fear that digital therapeutics will totally replace the status quo, and should the status quo be replaced?
So this is also a really important question, and our position at Orexo has been and will continue to be digital therapies are a great option and are a great complementary tool available for a healthcare provider. While our digital therapies can be used as pure standalone, and there are some segments of the population that don't have access to healthcare providers, where digital therapeutics like Deprexis, Vorvida, and Modia play a great role, we never intend to replace that doctor-patient relationship and that doctor-patient dialogue, or counselor-patient, whatever the healthcare professional is. So we really want people to see how these can complement their practice. And one of the things we've seen is the surge in demand, particularly for mental health. There's simply not enough qualified providers out there to meet the demand. So digital therapies like Deprexis can offer a great tool to help expand the capacity of a provider and help expand their practice, but we'll never replace that relationship. The other thing I'll say, Neil, is we've actually studied Deprexis in use with face-to-face therapy and have trial results that show that. And it's very encouraging because we've seen that when used together, they can actually help improve the effectiveness of a management plan for a patient.
Do all digital therapeutics require a prescription? And whether or not they do, speak a little bit to the learning curve when it comes to these platforms.
Yeah, so the learning curve is significant. I think as an industry, digital therapy is still in the very early stages of building out our education and also the evidence and the comfort level. There are digital therapeutics that meet the Digital Therapeutics Alliance standards that are prescription. In other words, a physician would prescribe them as they would another medical procedure or a pharmaceutical. There are also certain digital therapeutics that meet the standards that are non-prescription digital therapies. Vorvida is a great example of that. This is a digital therapy that's used for problem drinking. There's a tremendous amount of stigma. A lot of people don't even want to speak to their physician about it. And they can access Vorvida directly, not requiring a prescription from a physician. However, it still meets the clinical trial evidence standards and the privacy and security standards. So both are out there and both play a role, which is why we continue to talk about how can these complement your practice, what's the evidence standard, and what's the privacy and security standard that the therapies can demonstrate. And with ours, we're very happy to say that Deprexis and Vorvida meet those both standards today. Modia will. In fact, we're right in the middle of a large randomized clinical trial in the U.S. That's going to demonstrate that there.
Is the excitement and the anticipation and the demand for these therapeutics equal among professionals as well as patients, or is one group more enthusiastic than the other?
So we're seeing, I think, as we see with a lot of new introductions of approaches in healthcare, there are some groups that are adopting these much faster than others, and there are some that are dabbling a bit, and others that are waiting because they want to see a little bit more how they're being used. So it's a broad range. In mental health in particular, we're seeing a lot of providers being more open to new approaches, and particularly digital approaches. And a lot of that comes out with the experience of the pandemic over the past 2 years, where in the areas I work in, depression and substance abuse, those were significant issues before the pandemic. And unfortunately, they only got worse as people were isolated, disconnected, and just dealt with so many of the stresses that so many people have been facing. And so I do think in our area of mental health and substance abuse, there is a greater openness to try. But you still want to make sure in the end, no matter what it is, you have to work with that provider, you have to fit into their workflow and their practice, and you have to support and respect that doctor-to-patient or provider-to-patient relationship.
Give us a website where we can learn more.
So for Deprexis, you can go to usdeprexis.com, and for Vorvida, you can go to us.vorvida.com. Modia is usmodia.pro, and I would also mention the Digital Therapeutics Alliance, which is dtxalliance.org. All of those are great sites where you can learn about the therapies specifically, or the Digital Therapeutics Alliance. A lot of great information about the industry, companies in there, and the standards that we've spoken about today, Neil.
Dennis, I appreciate you giving us some of your time this morning. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Lots of great information. Hopefully we'll talk again.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to speak with you as well.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Dennis Urbaniak, Executive Vice President of Digital Therapeutics at Orexo. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, listen in, download at SoundCloud, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Health Professional Radio.